Alright everybody, welcome back to another Mech's Deck Tech. Today we're going over my modified precon. So we're doing Ixhel, Scion of Atraxa. The deck focuses heavily on the toxic mechanic, as well as like some proliferation and corruption effects, right? We're looking to ping each of our opponents for like at least one poison as early on as possible, and then proliferate them all, just slowly rising them to the top. So let's get started, right? We have a lot of toxic slash infecty kind of boys and a few spells that are going to help us along. Let's look into them. Probably going to mispronounce this one. I'm going to say that it's Bilious Skull Dweller. But they are a death-touching toxic boy for 1 black, right? They don't really want to block it because of the death touch, but I mean, even just the fact that it's a toxic 1 for 1. If you get this bad boy in your opening hand, you're basically guaranteed to hit at least one opponent, right? Good stuff. Early toxic damage is good. And late game, if like, you know, you need to hold him back as a blocker, that death touch is a chef's kiss moment. We got our Blight Mamba, right? Old school card, came in the deck. It's an Infect 1/1 for 2. But more importantly, you could regen this bad boy, right? So they're kind of forced to block it. You could even use it as like a blocker yourself if you're trying to like be defensive with it. It has Infect, so it's dealing damage in the form of counters as opposed to straight up damage. And then you can just regen it. So obviously, like, Trample kind of gets around it as a blocker, but outside of that, I think it's pretty solid. We got our boy, the Blight Belly Rat. So Blight Belly Rat actually works on 2 fronts. 1, it's a toxic 1 creature, and 2, when it dies, it's going to proliferate. So it's a 2/2, you're getting it down pretty early. Hopefully getting in that, like, one little bit of toxic damage. And then later on in the game, you can chump block with it, proliferate up that toxic. Good to go. Following that up, we have the lovely, almost like, overpowered for the cost, Bloated Contaminator. Right, for 2 and a green, you get a 4/4 Trample Toxic 1. Which is absurd. For 3 mana, you're getting a 4/4. Which would already be good. Toss and Trample. Okay, green, I see you. Toxic 1, and then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get to proliferate, so realistically it's a toxic 2. In that sense. But, if you've already hit other opponents with it, you get to proliferate all of their stuff. So, Bloated Contaminator is like a nice key piece of damage here for us. Following that up, we have another piece that came in the deck. We have the Contaminant Grafter. Another Trample boy. He seems like a little bit more fair in terms of power and ability to cost. So he's a 5/5 Trample with Toxic 1. Whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to 1 or more players, we get to proliferate. So the proliferation is only going to trigger once per turn for us. But, we love the Proliferate. He's Trampley. He's probably going to trigger it for us. And he's toxic. Or not he's toxic. He is toxic, but he's also got Corrupted, right? Beginning of our end step, if an opponent has 3 or more, we get to draw a card, then just, like, ramp. So this is only going to trigger for, like, 1 opponent. Generally, Corrupted gets stronger the more opponents that have it. But I can understand why Wizards kind of limited it to be like, no, if any of them have it, you get this, not for each that have it, you get this. Because in a proper game of Commander, right, if he was like, yeah, end of your turn, draw 3, play 3 lands, broken as fuck. This seems reasonable. Following up our Grafter, we have Ichor Rats, also came with the deck. Whenever they enter the battlefield, we're just giving everyone a poison counter. Now this includes ourselves. So if someone else is playing a Proliferate kind of deck effect, it's not ideal for us. He's definitely something that you could consider, like, basically just not playing or holding off until, you know, he's going to help you kind of secure that win. But if no one else is playing Toxic at the table, or no one else is playing any kind of Proliferate style effects, he's pretty solid. He's a solid choice to have here. Following up our Rat, we have our Rot Priest. A 1/5 with Toxic 2. Doesn't seem great, but whenever any of your creatures with Toxic deal damage, they get an extra poison counter. And he could turn your Toxic creatures into Death Touchers. So he's much more defensive in terms of the fact that he's gonna generally sit back as a 1/5 Death Toucher with some like open mana. But if you have the opportunity to hit with him, like 3 poison immediately turns uncorrupted, right? That's good stuff. It's what we're looking for. Speaking of early Toxic, we have a Flying Toxic, right? Flying Toxic 1 on a 1/1 body for 1 to black. You know, are there other Toxic and whatnot flying creatures out there? Like, even just like, what is it? It's a Glistener Elf, right? That I could play for a single green and its Infect. Definitely not bad. I like the flying as like the evasiveness of it. My pod doesn't tend to run a ton of like flying and reach outside of decks that it makes sense to like, oh, these like creatures kind of naturally have it. So I think the Pestilence Siphoner, pretty solid, and as a common, super cheap to pick up. Following that up, we have another card that just came in the deck, the Phyrexian Swarmlord. A little expensive at 6 for a 4/4. But he is Infect, right? So he's going to hit for 4 poison, assuming he gets through. And at the beginning of our upkeep, we get to create a bunch of little Phyrexian insects with Infect for each poison counter my opponents have. So if we have, you know, even just like a couple little bits of poison on everybody, we're going to generate a bunch of these Infecty tokens. They're not hasty, right? So they're going to sit back and wait. But they don't want to attack into infecting, you know, infecting little Phyrexian insects. So, Phyrexian Swarmlord, really good for just kind of like going wide, kind of letting us do what we want here. Speaking of our Flyboys, so this is actually really similar to our Pestilence Siphoner, only it has Infect instead of Toxic. So, in my opinion, he's a little better. Right, I think Infect is a stronger deterrent than Toxic, at least as far as combat goes. But not much else to say about him. We also have Skrelv, Defector Might. Right, he has Toxic 1, he can't block, which, you know, that's sort of the whole Mights thing. They can't block, they're really here to be attackers. But he basically makes it so one of our creatures is unblockable, and it gives them Toxic, and it gives them Hexproof. And we could pay a white mana or 2 life to do so, right? Does take a tap, so Skrelv is he's gonna get tapped down, but Toxic also stacks, right? If I have a creature that already has Toxic 1, and Skrelv's Defector Might targets them, they now have Toxic 1, which is effectively Toxic 2. You know, the ability to make a creature unblockable in this deck when we're trying to just like slap on a couple poison counters and proliferate up cannot be underrated. Following that up, we have the Slaughter Singer. A Toxic 2, whenever another creature enters with Toxic attacks, it gets +1/+1 to it a turn. So it's sort of like a little Toxic Lord. The Lord he bid is only on attack. But, you know, the Toxic ability is still hitting for damage, right? So we're not always guaranteed to win via poison, and the ability to win via combat damage being boosted slightly by the Slaughter Singer, in my mind, pretty good. After our Singer, we have Rex. Rexy boy. He is a 7-costed 8/8, can't be countered, has Trample and Toxic 4, Ward 4, and Haste. This dude is like a real nice finisher, right? Because he only has to hit for 1 damage through Trample. With 8 power, he's probably getting through, he's doing it quick, and he's going to give 4 poison counters. Instantly turns on Corrupted, possibly finishes off an opponent, right? Rex is great. Following that up, we have the Venomous Brutalizer. Toxic 3 on a 4/4 body. When it ETBs, we could pay 1 in the green, and if we do, we get to Proliferate. Right, so this is giving us both Toxic and Proliferation opportunities. You know, it's kind of like a nice little wombo combo there for us. You know, you don't think about it, but a Proliferation ETB could very easily finish off an opponent, right? These toxic creatures want to get out early and hit, but not all of them are tramply. In fact, most of them aren't. Once your opponent has some like solid chump blockers, you kind of need to Proliferate to push that poison over the edge. Venomous Brutalizer is one way to do that. Following that up, we have the Viridian Corruptor. Right, a 2/2 infect for 3, not bad. And when it ETBs, we get to destroy a target artifact. Mana rocks are rampant in Commander, right? So the ability to kind of blow up one of their precious mana rocks, or like, especially since like the Brothers War, we've seen a lot of like kind of big artifact creatures. You know, blowing up an artifact creature, also good. We have our alternate commander for the deck, in the form of Vishgraz, the Doom Hive. So it's Menace, which is great, right? Requires some extra blockers. Has Toxic 1, which isn't super strong, but on ETB, he's creating 3 mites, right? Each of those mites has Toxic 1, and he gets bigger and beefier for each poison counter our opponents have. So, you know, we're getting a big beefy boy late game, and even early game, right? We're getting 4 bodies for 5 mana. One of those bodies is a 3/3, the rest are like little tiny 1/1s, but they all have Toxic. Moving out of the creatures and into some spell-slinging poison, we have the Infectious Inquiry. We're going to draw 2, lose 2, which is already fine, and we're going to just give everyone a little poison counter. Right? We want to get these poison counters on everybody early, like I said before. We're looking to proliferate those up. You know, Infectious Inquiry, you know, 3 mana, lose 2 life, draw 2 cards. Life's a resource. We're going to spend it. We're going to dig for our big bombs and just try and get out ahead of stuff, you know? Next spell on our list is Vraska's Fall. Same cost, we're forcing each opponent to sacrifice a creature or planeswalker. Devastating against any kind of Voltron deck where they really only have like 1 or 2 good creatures. And again, we are passing out a poison counter to each of our opponents. Right, 3 poison and forcing 3 sacks for 3 mana. Vraska's Fall was good. And that common, super cheap. Pick it up, guys. We'll follow that up with some Norn's Decree. It's a little group huggy, you know, I'll admit that. But it's also a deterrent. So if they want to attack us and they deal damage, you know, we're going to give them a poison counter. Whenever a player attacks, this includes us, if the player being attacked or already poisoned, the attacking player gets to draw a card. So, like I said, a little group huggy, not generally my style, but it's a nice sort of, hey, if you want to attack me, you can take a poison counter. And the last bit of Toxic Boys is the Skrell's Hive. You know, we're going to lose a life, we're going to create a mite, it's going to have Toxic, and it's also got a little bit of little corruptedness for us, which gives all of our toxic creatures lifelink. We're paying life in this deck, because we're in black. Black does that, and this is kind of a way for us to bounce back a little bit, right? Life's getting low. Scrub's Hive's gotcha. And only one player rather, has to be corrupted for all of our creatures with Toxic to gain lifelink. And it's not only on attack, right? Our Toxic boys that are sitting back like our Necrogen Rot Priest will have lifelink. Wizards has been moving a lot towards like, oh, you can only get this buff on attacking. Scrub's Hive is like, nah, you get it all the time. And Corrupted's actually pretty easy for us to turn on in this deck. So we have a few other cards that have it. But before we get to those, let's move on to Proliferation Nation. Vraska, Betrayal Sting, right? So she comes in with 6 loyalty. We could zero her out to draw a card, lose a life, and proliferate. That proliferation's great. Again, we're kind of pushing these poison counters. Her -2 lets us turn like a key piece of our opponent's creature base into a little treasure. If we manage to get her up high enough, we could do her ultimate and like basically guarantee a player who we've not touched with poison is going to die. And with this deck kind of going wide, I think we have a lot of ways to protect her. But I'll take that draw a card, lose a life, proliferate, pretty much every time. We've already touched on the Blightbelly Rat, but he falls into the same category. Bloated Contaminator, again, already touched on him, we're just going to keep on rolling. Canker Bloom, right? A 3/2 body, we could pay 1 and sack it. We could destroy an artifact, we could destroy an enchantment, or we could proliferate. Proliferation is definitely why it's here. It really feeds into our Toxic strategy. The other 2 effects, though, are not bad, right? Again, destroy someone's important mana rock, destroy someone's important enchantment. Like, removal is necessary in the game, and we're here for it. We've already hit on the Contaminated Grafters. We're going to keep that moving. We have the Evolution Sage. So it's a landfall proliferate. Generally speaking, I think we don't really have any ways. Well, no, we have a couple ways to do it a little bit more ramp through things like rampant growth and like whatnot, but we don't have a ton of it. But, we're hoping to hit like 1 proliferated turn, and with our Toxic already happening, Evolution Sage remains like a pretty solid choice for any kind of proliferate effect you're looking to have in a deck. Grateful Apparition came with the deck, a little flying 1/1. Whenever it deals combat to a player or planeswalker, we get to proliferate. So, we're going to very, easily, generally speaking, be able to hit at least 1 person with a flying 1/1. The proliferate's going to let us pump up those poison counters. If we have Vraska out, we could obviously pump up her loyalty counters as well. But we're really here to kind of push the poison. Push it real good. Necrogen Rot Priest, we've already hit on him a little bit, so we're not gonna stay very long. He's not actually proliferate. He actually kind of is better in a sense that like he basically adds +1 Toxic to all of our Toxic creatures. So I'm going to say we're going to keep it moving. Norn's Choirmaster. Norn's Choirmaster is great. I mean, even just like the body itself, right? A 5/4 for 5, not bad. Flying first strike, pretty good. Whenever our commander ETBs or attacks, proliferate. That's what I'm talking about. Okay? Norn's Choirmaster is fantastic. Repeatable Proliferation, definitely the name of the game, and Norn's Choirmaster kind of like fills in that gap for us. We've already touched on it during our Toxic run, but we're gonna just, remind people, hey, Venomous Brutalizer. He TPs, go ahead and a little proliferation there for you. We have Expand the Sphere, which, actually does work really well with the Evolution Sage. It's one of our rampy boys. Could ramp twice. But even if it doesn't ramp twice, we're proliferating twice at that point, right? It proliferates equal to the difference. It's actually super cheap. It's 25 cents. It's great in any proliferate deck. It works really well here. You know, solid pick. In a similar vein, but instead of from grave to hand, it's grave to battlefield. We get to also proliferate with it. Again, a little slow, but because this is from graveyard to field, I feel like the slowness is a little more warranted. But either way, I think it's pretty good. So, a little expensive to activate the effect, but at some point we're going to have extra mana, and we're going to use that extra mana to go ahead and tap this once a turn, do a little proliferation, and at some point we get to, you know, use it to kind of blow up somebody, right? An annoying creature. We slapped a -1/-1 on them whenever this first came in. Maybe it's a lord on the opponent's of the field, maybe it's a mana dork. Either way, a few proliferations later, they're gone. Listening Sphere, when ETBs proliferate, also happens to be a mana rock. A little slow in the sense that like it ETBs tapped, but it's also corrupted for us. And when it's corrupted, we're getting 3 mana, so 3 mana off of a 3 mana costed rock. I'll let it be slow. We also have Staff of Completion. We really are here for the proliferate effect. And, you know, again, we're in black, we're willing to pay life. Some of our toxic creatures will hopefully eventually have some lifelink thanks to Sprawl's Hive. But, you know, we have a lot of other proliferation effects in the deck already. So, you know, I'm willing to pay, you know, 6, maybe even 9 life in a single turn if it means I'm taking out 2-3 players with it. Last, but certainly not least for the Proliferation Nation, is Karn's Bastion, right? Same cost for tap proliferate. You know, it is gonna effectively cost 5 because we're tapping the land itself. But I think that cost is worth it, right? Proliferation is the name of the game. We're going to get a little bit of poison to everybody, proliferate up as quick as possible, and hope to kind of just crush all of them. Not necessarily a proliferator, but a lot of our proliferate effects are kind of off of ETB. So Honorable Mention to Elish Norn, Mother of Machines. She's going to double up our ETB triggers, and, you know, we're also shutting down the ETB triggers of our opponents. Also a 4/7 for 5, that's Vigilant. Just not bad. You know, not bad. With that, we also have our Corrupted mechanic, right? Corrupted's new. We need an opponent who has at least 3 toxic counters, or poison counters, rather, on them to kind of move into the Corrupted zone. But not as hard as you think to get that going in this deck. It happens pretty consistently. Our commander is going to give us pseudo card draw off of our opponent's decks, and lets us cast those spells as if we had mana of any color. We've already spoke about Contaminated Grafter in pretty much every other section of this, but again, he's just here as a winner. So, you know, he's gonna Corrupted ramp, basically. And that Corrupted ramp is going to work really well with our Evolution Sage to also proliferate. It's good stuff. Feed the Infection. We're going to draw 3, lose 3 for 4 mana. Everyone who's corrupted, ideally everybody, is going to lose 3 life. Right? We're losing 3 life, they're losing 3 life. You know, are we going to get everyone with poison every time? Not likely. But we might be able to, you know, get some of them through just like regular damage. We have Geth's Summons. We're going to return a creature from the graveyard to battlefield. For each opponent who has been corrupted, we're going to go ahead and just steal one of theirs as well. So potentially stealing in a regular 4-player game 4 creatures from graves onto the battlefield for 4 mana. We have the Phyrexian Atlas, a little mana rock, but whenever we have any opponents who are corrupted, every time we tap it for mana, they're going to lose a life. Right, again, little bits of ping damage can go a long way over the course of a game. We've already talked about it, but we'll hit on it real quick. Skrelv's Hive again, once we have an opponent who is corrupted. Whenever our toxic creatures are on the field, they got lifelink. Let's talk about our big finishers here. Wormquake is one of them, right? We're going to create a 6/6 worm the first time we cast it. It has Trample and Toxic 1. For each opponent who is corrupted, we're creating another copy. So, probably 2, maybe 3 worms, pretty easily. 4 if we're super lucky. And it has flashbacks, so we can create more big beefy boys. Again, like big tramply boys with Toxic. So we're aiming to win via poison, but big trample boys let us also win via regular damage. So we're kind of getting the best of both worlds, which is kind of the balance that Toxic is aiming to kind of hit. We also have Noxious Assault as a nice finisher. So we're going wide, right? And it's like, cool, we have a bunch of creatures. Maybe we have enough toxic damage on them to finish everybody off, assuming they all got through, but we don't have a way to make everyone unblockable. Noxious Assault is like, go ahead and block me. Every time you block, have a poison counter. You don't want it, you're gonna die. Just a nice way to, like, kind of chef's kiss, put that little bit, little extra poison damage, get us over the top. Let's move into a little bit of rampy boy stuff. We have Culling Ritual. It's definitely going to blow up all of our mites that we've been creating, so we don't love it in that sense. But we're going to get mana for each one destroyed. So we're also probably wiping out a fair bit of our opponent stuff, especially if they're also doing any kind of token or low to the ground sort of strategies. So it doubles as a field wipe. It's good ramp that we could put to use towards some of our big spells, like our finishers, Wormquake. Noxious Assault is a little expensive, but there's a lot of things we could do with it. We're gonna ramp up. We have Cultivate, right? We're gonna search for 2 basic lands. You gotta come onto the battlefield tapped. They work really well for the Evolution Sage. But even if the Evolution Stage isn't out, ramping for 2 on turn 3 is fantastic. That means turn 4, we potentially have 7 mana. Turn 4, we're getting out big things fast. That's what green's all about. Expand the Sphere, we've already kind of gone over. Not gonna hit on it super long. Potential 2-card ramp, and if not, we're gonna proliferate the difference. Rampant Growth, we're going to get a single basic land tapped. So if we got this turn 2, we hit, Cultivate turn 3. We have 8 mana turn 4. Don't mind if I do. We have Dark Ritual, right? For 1 black mana, we're getting 3 black mana. That's value down to me. We also got our mana rocks, because this is Commander after all. We have our Arcane Signet, our Commander Sphere. We have Glistening Sphere, Golgari Signet, Phyrexian Atlas, Soul Ring, and Talisman of Resilience. Right? Plenty of ramp in this deck to get out our big spells faster. Card draw. We're going to see some things being repeated because they kind of do a lot of... They hit multiple marks for the deck. Vraska is getting a lot of straw card lose a life. Gonna see that a whole lot. Mentor of the Meek, right? We have a lot of low to the ground, 2 power or less creatures in the deck. I'll gladly pay the extra 1 to draw a card. We have Feed the Infection, draw 3, lose 3. Infectious Inquiry, draw 2, lose 2. Night's Whisper, draw 2, lose 2. Painful Truths, right? A little bit of a choice, right? We could draw 1, lose 1, draw 2, lose 2, or draw 3, lose 3. Just really depends on the colors we use to cast the spell. Rite of Harmony is actually great. Whenever a creature or enchantment has a benefit or control this turn, we get to draw a card, we can flash it back. Generally speaking, we're guaranteed to get like at least 1 card draw off of it. I'll pay 2 mana to draw a card. But ideally, right, we're hitting it with some of our bigger things that are generating a lot of bodies and we're drawing a lot of cards off of it, or we have a lot of mana. So we can kind of like get a bunch of mana, play a bunch of creatures, draw a bunch of cards, have it kind of cycle into itself. Commander Sphere technically lets us sack it to draw a card. Staff of Completion lets us pay 4 life to draw a card. Phyrexian Arena is going to have us draw an extra card at the cost of a life at each upkeep. Takasai's Welcome is going to make it so, again, mana value 3 or less is going to let us draw. This is only going to trigger once a turn, but still pretty good. Moving into Destruction, we're going back to Calling Ritual, right? Potentially like a pretty devastating field wipe, depending on like what your opponent's playing. Right? It's only mana value 2 or less, but like tokens don't have any mana value. So they are gone. Fumigate is going to blow up all creatures. We're going to gain some life back, so we do need to be able to pay for all of our life costing effects. Fumigate's a good way to be like, hey, we're actually behind right now, let me just wipe the board real quick. Merciless Eviction is going to let us choose, right? Against some Elected Brothers War decks that are focused really heavily on artifacts, we're just going to get rid of all of them. We could get rid of creatures, we could get rid of enchantments, we could get rid of planeswalkers. It's very versatile, we like it. Phyresis Outbreak is actually really good, because it gets rid of creatures in the form of -1/-1. So it gets around indestructible. A little bit more targeted, we have Beast Within. We have Mortify. Putrefy. And Swords. But that's the deck, guys. Ixhel, Scion of Atraxa. Let me know what you guys think. Obviously, there are some other Proliferate cards out there that I don't have. I didn't buy any singles for this. This is just for me cracking packs and buying the structure deck. The pre-con, if you will. Until next time, good luck with those builds, and have a good one.